This is the Bill Press Show.
It is the Bill Press Show. Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Ogburn. It is Thanksgiving week, so we are here, but we're not here. We took a couple days off, but don't worry. We are leaving you with some excellent content that you can enjoy either at the Thanksgiving table. What the heck? You can do that if you want. Or while you're traveling, or however you're doing this Thanksgiving holiday. We appreciate you tuning in, and we wouldn't leave you without something from the Bill Press Show. It is our gift to you. So one of the things that is near and dear to my heart are the national parks. I love the national parks. I'm an annual member. I'm a big fan. And I wanted to talk about what's going on with the national parks with someone from the HOPE crew. Now, what is HOPE? HOPE is Hands-On Preservation Experience. We are joined now by Tom Cassidy from HOPE to talk a little bit about the national parks and the funding and the volunteering and how we fix some of the problems that we are seeing. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Well, Peter, thank you, and it's great to be here today.
First, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
What's your favorite national park?
You're asking me to choose among my children.
People ask me this all the time.
No, I think I'm very fortunate in my work. I'm actually with the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Great.
And HOPE Crews are a program that we've had for 4 years.
Oh, nice.
So I'm the Vice President for Government Relations at the National Trust, and 2/3 of our national parks were established because of cultural or historic reasons.
Amen. I think that's great.
So I was fortunate to be up at Ellis Island just a few weeks ago. I've also had spectacular experiences at places like Yellowstone and Yosemite. Why aren't I there now?
Tell me about it, right?
But no, the parks are Americans love their parks. One of the problems, however, is that we've had decades of disinvestment.
Yeah.
And as a result, we have a deferred maintenance backlog of nearly $12 billion. And HOPE Crews are one of the things that the National Trust launched about 4 years ago. It stands for Hands-On Preservation Experience. It's designed to get youth and sometimes all veterans crews out into the national parks, repairing and rehabilitating different buildings or sometimes adobes at parks, and also providing some hands-on professional skills to youth and veterans.
So let's talk about the funding aspect of the national parks first, because it seems to me if you have all this stuff going on, it means that there's not necessarily enough funding for the national parks. Is that true?
That is very much true. Probably the most significant policy initiative that the National Trust and our partners have been working on is to get a dedicated, mandatory funding stream for rehabilitation and repair of our parks. And the good news is that there is legislation in the Senate that has strong bipartisan support. It's been passed out of the Senate relevant committee. We have more than 1/3 of the Senate as co-sponsors. And over in the House, we have similar legislation that has been co-sponsored by more than 220 members. That's one half the House. And we have remarkable bipartisan support from the Democrat and the Republican.
Wait, you're blowing my mind here.
Yeah.
Bipartisan support.
It's true. And I would really point out, the House, for many of your listeners, it's not often a place where bipartisanship thrives. But on the issue of fixing our parks, legislation was co-sponsored by Chairman Rob Bishop of the House Natural Resources Committee and the ranking member Rahul Rahalva.
Nice.
And again, we've got 220 co-sponsors, and we have the strong support by Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke. And one of the things that Zinke is personally investing a great deal of his time in is building the support so that this legislation can be done this year.
I think that's great. I think that's good news. That's positive. So, there was a time, I can't remember if it was this year or last year, that we were talking about Bears Ears Monument.
Yes,
there was
that's
a lot
right.
of A lot of the. So where do we stand with that now?
Well, Bears Ears, it is a spectacular American landscape that tells the story of Native American peoples, well, going to time immemorial, with important places that were developed by the Native Americans in about, well, almost 1,000 years ago, cliff dwellings, spectacular rock art. It's actually not a national park. But President Obama declared this place to be a national monument.
Right.
That's authority that goes back to Theodore Roosevelt. It was used to protect the Grand Canyon, for example, by Theodore Roosevelt initially. President Trump, in an action that we believe was unlawful, has purported to sharply reduce the size of Bears Ears, and that litigation over that is presently pending in federal court. So
that's where we are with that.
That's where we are with that. As late as just last week, my organization and many other organizations filed, comments on a management plan that the Interior Department and Forest Service has released, and it was the least protective they proposed the least protective of the alternatives, but we fundamentally feel don't do a management plan for less than a third of what President Obama designated until we can resolve this in court.
What is the biggest threat to our national parks these days?
Well, there's the slow erosion of funding to take care of our parks. And so we have buildings that are not accessible, roads in bad shape, bathrooms that aren't open, and then buildings that aren't being rehabilitated and cared for.
Yeah.
So the Hope Crews are a way. We've sent Hope Crews down to Martin Luther King National Historic Site in Atlanta, and we've gotten young African-American youth engaged in painting and repairing a number of the houses on the street where Martin Luther King grew up.
Yeah.
We've had...
That's great.
It is cool.
Yeah. No, I mean,
yeah.
It really is.
Yes.
You don't have to make this pitch to me because I'm already on board, right? But like to people who aren't familiar or don't necessarily understand the importance of these, what is the importance of these national parks?
The national parks tell the story of all Americans, whether it's Independence Hall. Alexander Hamilton was at Independence Hall.
People
or
love that these days.
Patterson Great Falls National Historic Park, Patterson, New Jersey. Alexander Hamilton was very involved in trying to identify a source of, industrial powerhouse. But there's also a minor league baseball stadium there that was part of the Negro League, and the park was expanded a couple years ago to include a place called Hinchliffe Stadium. And we got volunteer Hope Crew out there to paint and pull up weeds and make the place look really cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's baseball. We've had Hope Crews at the Lincoln Boyhood Home, at up in Hyde Park for both Franklin Delano Roosevelt's home and Eleanor Roosevelt's home. Lyndon Baines Johnson's property down in Texas. So, again, these are the types of places that are in our park system. Another project we had was at Bandelier National Monument in New Mexico. Senator Heinrich joined to be a part of that. And there we had Hispanic youth helping out on the old adobes and doing work on archaeological sites going back almost 1,000 years.
Something that stuck with me through this whole conversation about national parks, national monuments, and all that, it came from actually the Ken Burns documentary.
Yes.
Where, somebody at some point realized and recognized that America does not have a ton of history, comparatively speaking, to other nations, but the one thing that we do is an embarrassment of riches when it comes to natural beauty. We just do.
We do. It's a great country. Get out and see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And other countries obviously have some of this as well, but in every single state, there is some gorgeous formation or mountain range or whatever it is that you could go out there and you can hike or you could see or you could get back into nature and do that. But also because of the great work that has been done to preserve those areas, we have ecosystems, wildlife,
Correct.
things like that we're also working to preserve.
Of course,
right?
right, absolutely. But I would just differ a little bit with your with the statement that we don't have the history of other places. Now, we don't have there weren't kings running around in the 14th century, but we had these remarkable places like Mesa Verde National Park. You mentioned Bears Ears, or you go to a place like Chaco Cultural National Park in New Mexico, and these were the vibrant heart of American civilization back in around 1,000 years ago. And they were booming places with remarkable people, and the parks tell their stories. They tell the stories of the American Revolution, plainly the Civil War, and all of these historic and cultural resources suffer from the same kind of benign neglect of failing to invest. But what is exciting is that Hope Crews are a part of that, and then so again is this unusual bipartisan legislation in the Congress.
It's just on a personal level, right? This summer, I went to St. Louis.
Yes.
And just outside of St. Louis, there are the Cahokia Indian Mounds.
Yes.
To what you were just saying,
Yes.
right? There are a lot of people that talk about how, a lot of Native Americans were not as civilized because they didn't really build cities, right? They had communities, but they didn't really build cities. Well, you look at the Cahokia Indian Mounds, and you can say absolutely that was not true.
That's right. It wasn't with steel and concrete, or it wasn't steel and concrete or brick, but it was, they moved dirt, and they used built to build the largest pyramids north of Mexico City. But Cahokia...
If you're ever anywhere close to it, by the way, you should go. It's spectacular to just see.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
And if you're just a little bit further north along the Mississippi, go to Iowa, where the Field of Dreams is. Just watched that recently. And there's Effigy Mounds National Monument right along the bluffs of the Mississippi. It is a breathtakingly beautiful place. But hundreds of years ago, the Native American people built these large mounds for in the shapes of bears and serpents and panthers. And actually there, I had the pleasure of advocating in Congress with the woman who runs the local county economic development commission. They get 3 times as many visitors to Effigy Mounds National Monument as there are residents of her county. But the 30-year-old septic system went out last summer, and they had to bring in porta potties to have visitor use over the winter. And I think that we expect more when we go to a national park. We want to be able to enjoy it in comfort.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. That's a very, very good point. Okay, so let's get back into a little bit of the legislation.
Yeah.
We only have a couple minutes left. What's on the horizon that we're seeing? Like you mentioned some of the stuff that's being worked on, but what could that mean to these monuments and parks?
Well, that's the great question, because the answer is both of these bills in the House and Senate would set up a special dedicated fund that could be used only for the rehabilitation and repair of our parks. The bill in the House is a little bit more expansive. It would allow money to be used on some other federal properties.
Sure.
But the parks in the Senate, it's $6.5 billion over 5 years. The idea is, some of your listeners may know about the Land and Water Conservation Fund or the Historic Preservation Fund. These programs take money out of offshore oil and gas receipts. And the idea there was to reinvest them in assets of the American people. And the Restore Our Park Act would do something similar. It takes money from federal energy receipts. It's not tax money. It's money that's being generated by oil and gas or wind or solar on federal lands and dedicates it to repairing our parks.
I think it's great, and I think it's wonderful, and you're doing great work there, Tom Cassidy. Thank you so much for joining us.
My
here,
pleasure.
On the Bill Press Show. For those of you who are traveling or aren't able to watch us live, we're happy to provide some stuff for you here on this Thanksgiving break, and we will be back live on Monday. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you then. Thanks again, Tom.
Thank
I really
you, Peter.
appreciate it.